Hey, I got 8 of you already. Let me make sure really quick that I have the chat set up because I accidentally leave it off sometimes. Let me see. Chat. All right. So you guys should be able to hop into the chat. I'm not sure where it shows up for you, but for me, it's on the right side of the video. I'm excited to see so many of you actually on here this quickly. Wasn't expecting that, but it's kind of awesome. So, hi, I am your wacky kooky professor for careers in psychology. You can call me Jen. And I just wanted to do a little touch base kind of introductory video so that you guys could kind of get to know the structure of the webinar a little bit and just to kind of answer some of the questions that you guys had in that initial posting where I asked you guys if you ever had any questions about psychology prior to the course. And something that really kind of threw me off was that so many of you wrote that you didn't have any questions about psychology. And while I really wish that I believed that all of you have all of your questions answered and you know exactly what you're going to do in the field. You know exactly what you're going to do when you graduate. You've got this stuff like all just done. You know what's going on. I feel like you might not know all of the answers that you think you do. And I hope that you do end up having questions and that you ask them over the course of the semester and that you do really get something out of this class, because I definitely have a lot of information floating around in here related to this kind of stuff. So I hope that you utilize that. So I'm going to be sitting here and looking at the chat. So if you have any kinds of questions that you want to throw out there, I will definitely get to them and answer all of them. But I do have some that I pulled aside from the discussion posting that I wanted to address in particular, just because I thought that they were either really, really good questions or just really interesting questions. And one of the things that you guys asked was, is the psychology degree as useless as people say it is? And yes, I have PhD versus PsyD on my list, actually, so I will get to that. I have them kind of ordered out by the flow of the topic. But I've never had somebody outright ask, is psychology useless? But definitely when I was doing undergrad and I would talk to my family about doing my degree in psychology or yeah, I have plenty of geeky stuff floating around here. But I would talk to people about wanting to do psychology, and some people would just laugh at that, like it wasn't really a serious, viable option for something to study in undergrad. And I imagine that many of you have either gotten that same feedback from somebody or just in some way feel that way about the degree itself. And something you should know is that psychology graduates more students at FIU on a year-to-year basis than any other major. So even if it was that useless, you could do nothing with it, I highly doubt we would be the biggest graduating class every year from FIU. So we run the university. Just remember that. A lot of people major in psychology. And the vast majority of you asked me, what can I do with a bachelor's degree in psych? And I'll definitely get to that both in this video and throughout the course of the semester. But you should realize that psychology covers so many different subject areas. There are so few things in life where you can't utilize some aspect of a psychology degree. If you're going to go into anything in the medical field, you're talking about interacting with people and with patients and whatnot, which goes back to human interaction, which goes back to the things that you learned in psychology. If you're going to go into the business world and you're looking at selling or marketing or anything that involves getting somebody to buy a good and service, you're looking at the power of persuasion and motivation, which goes into human psychology. Basically, any field that you can really think of, you can take it and you can either combine it with psychology or find the root of psychology in it and pair it together and go into that field, or find some way to leverage yourself because you do have that degree in psych. So don't think that your degree is useless. Don't think that because you may not be prepared yet or know exactly what you're going to do with it when you get out of undergrad, that there isn't some sort of value in it. And especially if you are just starting off in your career and you're taking this course when it was kind of meant to be taken, which is at the very beginning of your psychology sequence, you can start leveraging yourself within the field of psychology relatively early, just with the kinds of classes that you take and being strategic in the different areas that you choose to take your courses in and focus in. And somebody asked, and I didn't know where I was going to put this, but I figure I might as well answer it here, if it's possible to get minors in different areas outside of psychology, that advisement is not necessarily the best at doing that. And definitely you can pair your psych major with another full major or with minors. And just because you do a degree in psychology, maybe if you want to go to grad school in something else, you can go to law school, you can go to med school, you can go into business school, you can do a very wide variety of things after your degree with the basis in psychology. So somebody asked, what is a misconception about psychology? And if you've taken any courses yet and you've gotten far enough into the degree, or you even tell somebody like, hey, I'm a psychology major, one of the first things that somebody will say to you, and I get this on a day-to-day basis, is, oh, you must be psychoanalyzing me right now. So to me, the biggest misconception about psychology is that it's this field where you learn how to read minds and you learn how to manipulate things, and then you just go kind of assess people and tell them what to do in their lives. And while there is a very small branch of psychology that does do psychoanalysis and does tie into having somebody lay on a couch and assessing their life, there is so much more to the field of psychology than just Freud. Freud is extremely overrated. Sorry, I'm going to throw it out there. You're going to hear a lot about him. You're probably going to learn to hate him just as much as I do. So tying into all of this, somebody asked, is it true that there's not many job opportunities in psychology? And that is 100% untrue. So I've been working on a database of jobs related to psychology, which means both directly in certain fields of psychology and in related fields of psychology, and just different things you can do with your degree. And believe it or not, there's actually a very wide variety of jobs that even at the like AA level, so at 2 years of college, or if you did an AA from Miami-Dade or something like that, that you can start getting into the field of psychology with relatively little experience. With the bachelor's degree, there is a whole laundry list of jobs that you can get into. And it's not like psychology is a field that's going to start paying you tons and tons of money, but there are livable jobs with a bachelor's degree in a very wide variety of jobs in psychology. So you can work with human and social welfare, you can work in business, you can work with legal stuff, you can work in the medical field. There's a lot of different things, and we'll get into those things over the course of the semester. since this entire class is about careers in psychology. So if psychology, I think the same person asked this, if psychology is not a good career choice, why offer that major in universities? And I think might have already answered that, just because you can tie so many other things into it. And it is a very important field that's never going to go away. So if you think about psychology in general, right? When I was growing up, being diagnosed with depression or anxiety was just starting to become a thing where people actually went in and talked to therapists and actually got diagnosed and started getting help for it. When my mom was going to school, it was completely non-existent. People didn't have anxiety, they didn't have depression. You were told to kind of suck it up and just live your life. And talking about those things and diagnosing those things and treating those things, it wasn't very common. And even between the time of when, I was going through those things to now, it's becoming something that we talk about a lot more. It's becoming a lot more credible, and we're learning a lot more about different types of mental health. So if you look at something like ADHD or autism, which are two very huge sub areas of the whole psychology world, those were things that we didn't even talk about or we didn't even think existed maybe 10 years ago. So there's plenty of opportunity in these fields. And as we learn more about mental health and we discuss it more and we validate it more, there's going to be more careers and more opportunities. And hopefully within actual departments, they'll start having more specializations in different areas. Because I know that at FIU, at least, there's not a huge opportunity to specialize your degree. You kind of have to go out of your own way to select those classes on your own if you want to major in neuroscience or some different areas like that. But it is possible. Somebody asked, I did see your PsyD versus PhD thing. I'm not ignoring it. Somebody said, I always like to ask people in the field how they leave their work and separate themselves from what they hear from clients. So even though the field of psychology goes far beyond traditional therapy, I'd say probably half of every student that I end up teaching from a semester to semester basis has some ambition to do something related to counseling. So even if you're not doing direct counseling, like sitting down with patients one-on-one, and you're doing something more on a social work thing, there is kind of a burden when you get into the field of psychology of bringing home your work, regardless of necessarily what your clientele is. And I've had some students who have been genuinely worried that because they might suffer from depression or maybe even something like bipolar or schizophrenia or any mental health condition, that maybe they have no right to be in psychology, because how can I talk to other people about their mental health and well-being without being perfect like that myself? And I'm here to tell you that it doesn't matter if you have depression or anxiety or schizophrenia or bipolar or any of these sorts of things. You can still be a perfectly functional psychologist in whatever capacity you want to be a psychologist. And part of it does tie into this question of how do you separate yourself from your work? So when I was an undergrad, I had these great ambitions that I was going to be an adolescent psychotherapist or psychologist, and I was going to work specifically with phobias related to anxiety and, social phobias like that. And why did I want to get into that? Well, a lot of us who are studying psychology do it because we have some experience with it ourselves, whether it's something introspective where we're trying to answer questions about ourselves, or we've witnessed other people go through things and we have some desire to solve those questions and help others. So for me, it was out of personal experience. I went to therapists when I was younger, and it seemed like none of them had any sort of direct experience with anxiety. So I thought, me as a sufferer, I would make a much better therapist because I've actually gone through it. So I might have some real world applications to share with my patients. But I got to a certain point where I realized that if I went in every single day and talked to somebody who had anxiety, it might actually make that worse for myself. Maybe I wasn't as strong in my own personal progress as I wanted to be. So I chose to go into a field of psychology that didn't directly relate to something that I went through. So those are the kinds of questions that you need to answer yourself when you're thinking about what kind of career you're going to do in psychology. Is, do I have that ability to separate the thing that I'm interested in from whatever drives me or from my own personal stability? And if you feel like that could potentially be a problem, then that's something you need to address really early on in your career. Because as much as you want to help other people, you should always be able to help yourself first. Because if you're not stable, if you're not feeling good about something, the last thing you want to do is project that onto somebody else or potentially have that become some sort of situation. Do psychologists seek psychological help? Are they considered weak for seeking help? So actually, I had a conversation about this recently, about how I should have gone into the therapy field of specifically treating and doing psychotherapy with other psychologists, because it is absolutely not that anybody within the psychology community would perceive a psychologist as being weak for seeking out help. I think it'd be quite the contrary. I think that we 100% respect others for acknowledging that they have some sort of, issue that they need to work through, even if it's just like day-to-day maintenance of your mental health. We're very much advocates for that. So I highly doubt that you would ever find a psychologist that looks down upon another psychologist. But what you will find, and I've definitely felt this way myself, is that once you get to a certain part of psychology, you kind of know what's wrong with you. You kind of know how to diagnose yourself, and it's very hard to find somebody sometimes that you feel like can offer you a new perspective that you don't already know yourself. So it would definitely help if there were psychologists out there that specifically focused in other psychologists that could offer some sort of, inception level health advice for people who are in the field of psychology. But definitely don't consider yourself to be weak if you need that kind of help, or don't think that other people would think that you were weak for needing that kind of help. If anything, you are stronger for knowing yourself better, and that is a good sign for you as a potential psychologist. Somebody asked, how do I make the most out of my degree and expand upon it? I think I said something kind of a little bit about this, but I guess I'll try to focus on it a little bit more. And if you are relatively early in your career, it's going to be a lot easier. Your career at FIU, it's going to be a lot easier for you to do this. But I strongly suggest sitting down with not the course catalog, because the course catalog can be really deceiving. I thought when I sat down with it when I was a freshman that I was going to minor in geology because they taught all these courses, hypothetically, they were in the course catalog, about dinosaurs and archaeology and fossils and stuff like that. And I've always been obsessed with dinosaurs. So I was like, this is awesome. I'm going to minor in this. And I'm going to have this like zoology, geology thing going with my psychology major. And those courses don't necessarily exist. There's descriptions for them, but it doesn't mean that there's professors that offer them. So what you need to do is really take a look at who's in the department and where their research areas are and what they specialize in and the types of things that they really actually actively teach. And you can go to the department and they have a sheet of paper that lists like every course that's offered, and who teaches it and whatnot, usually on a kind of semester to semester or a year to year basis sort of deal. But it'll give you a better perspective into what people are actively teaching. And the best way to capitalize on your degree specifically at, FIU is to pair your interests with the professors that are in those areas and start to get to know those professors. And once you do that, you can start to make connections in the area of research, whether it's you getting involved in their research labs or them signing on to do, you know, your own research, independent study type stuff. And then from there, you start building connections that give you recommendation letters that lead into grad school and whatnot. Always, 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 if you can, build relationships with the people who are teaching you. They're there for a reason. They know a lot, whether or not they openly tell you they know a lot, they do. And, you know, personally, I love when students keep in contact with me because there's a chance that you're going to run into some sort of roadblock that I've already tackled, and I'm already going to know how to get past it. And we can get you past it a lot easier. And maybe I know things about the degree that you don't. So by talking to me or any other professor, I'm not trying to make this all about me, even though it's all about me right now. Let's face it, right? You talk to those professors and you get that information as opposed to just being, you know, a student who comes in and out of class and doesn't necessarily interact very much. I know interaction sucks. People suck. Most professors suck. Sometimes everything sucks. You have to park at FIU. You have to get in. You have to go talk to them. Yeah, but it's gonna benefit you. Just rip it off like a Band-Aid and go in and do it. You laugh at me, but I totally, people suck. They do. I'm sorry. I'm one of those people. What kind of field in psychology do I think is best? I don't think there is such thing as a best or worst area in psychology. You can certainly go and look at the statistics of which ones have more jobs or which ones have higher paying jobs or which ones have more satisfied employees and whatnot. But that totally depends on you and what you're passionate about. There is no one good area of psychology. They're all, to me, they're all equal. If you were looking at just if good to you is which ones make the most money, traditionally, IO psychology, which is business psychology for all intents and purposes, is one of the higher paying areas. You can certainly have a lucrative career as a private therapist. And then if you do go into the PhD route and you start working at hospitals or something in like really high level administrative positions, there are certainly things that can start making you a lot of money. But most of us don't go into this for the money. So sadly, some of us be Poe, and that's it. In terms of entry-level career options, that is something that I don't want to get into right now because it's a big topic all on its own, and we're going to talk about that over the course of the semester for sure. What if what you want to do doesn't have to do with psychology? Should you get your BA as a backup? I feel like Plan B distracts from Plan A. That would really depend on what your Plan A is. I mean, are they two things that you can do at the same time? There's certainly room within your major to double major if you really look at the credits and how they all shake out and what the requirements are and stuff like that. There's definitely, you know, ways to do actually two things that really aren't that similar to one another and still get out. But having a Plan B doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to sacrifice Plan A. Having Plan B these days is actually a very, very smart thing to do. There's a few more of these questions from your posts that I want to address, and then I want to address that PhD PsyD thing and maybe a couple things related to grad school or any other questions that you might have. But for some reason, some of these questions, they still they stuck out to me. Somebody said, at what point do people decide that they can teach other people, write books or articles and etc.? And what is giving them this confidence? And I thought that was a really interesting question, especially as somebody who has only been in an educational position kind of teaching as many classes as I do and having as many students as I do for a few years now. And I think part of it is personal experience, where you get to a point where you've experienced enough of these things and you start seeing that other people might be struggling with it, or there's a way that you can offer your perspective to them. So you decide you want to help them in that way. Or, you know, professors, there are a lot of professors at FIU that teach because it's a requirement for their tenure. They're really there to do the research, and that's where their passion is. And they only teach because they kind of have to. And that might be some of the classes where you find that it's a little drier or less interesting, or they're not as good as interacting. But usually people get to that point because they have some sort of like aha moment within themselves where they're like, listen, there's something I can do to educate people and to make things better for other people. So I'm going to hop aboard and I'm going to do that. Like personally, I'm writing a textbook for this class and the senior seminar, which I hope is going to be done this year, just because there's nothing else that exists that actually accurately talks about the process of going through your degree in psychology, choosing a job, choosing a grad school, and getting through any of those things. It's sad. We graduate so many psychologists, and there's just nothing out there still that really offers a whole lot of answers in one place. So that's my goal. That's why I'm going to do it. I don't really know anything about somebody asked about a program that's a double in, it's a major, a master's degree in psychology along with a law degree. And it sounds pretty awesome, because if you do want to go into a field like law, it's a very oversaturated field. There's a lot of people that do that degree and then get out and they have a reality check where they're working in some sort of legal clinic, like the ticket clinic, like they work for Alex Hanna, and that's their first however many years after going and doing this illustrious, you know, JD. So if you do have an option to do multiple things at the same time, I am 100% an advocate for that, because it gives you a leg up in whatever it is that you're doing. Two things are always better than one, usually. That was kind of an oxymoron. Usually, always, two things are better than one. But to me, they are. Is a degree in psychology a good option if you're planning on applying to med school? Absolutely. There are a lot of very successful applicants to med school that take the psychology route in the beginning. But what you do have to kind of do is look at some of the pre-med track courses, like the biology and the chemistry, and start incorporating some of those things into your curriculum, because there are certain requirements of med school just on a base level of the kind of courses you need to have on your transcript and stuff like that, or just things that you need to know to get through the MCAT, which is essentially the GRE of med school. So you're going to have to focus somewhat in those medical areas, but at the same time, you can still do psychology. And certainly if you have aspirations of being a psychiatrist, you're going to med school and you're going to be doing psychology. So they go pretty well together. But in general, the medical field, whether you're a doctor or a nurse or just working in a hospital, and psychology are two things that go hand in hand and mesh well, because you're going to be working with patients. And your job with those patients is to make them feel comfortable, because most of them are in a very uncomfortable or even scary situation when they're seeing you. So your job is to understand them and to figure out how to relate to them in a way that's going to make them feel safer with their health in your hands. So psych is always going to be something that ties into that. You've had those doctors, I'm sure, that their bedside manner is awful. You ever go into the emergency room and you have the most serious doctor ever that just has no personality, and you're laying in there and you're like, what's wrong with me? Am I dying? And the guy or girl or whoever is just completely unresponsive and gives you things very direct. I don't like those people. The best doctors are the ones that can relate to you and that have some sort of knowledge of humanity and how to interact with people. There's a couple other things that I wanted to talk about. Somebody said, how can I find an internship related to psychology? And that is an important question, but not a lot of people ask it, but it's still really important, because there are certain fields, like if you go into business, it's pretty easy to get an internship because it's pretty straightforward. You're going to go into a business and you're going to do whatever it is that they want you to do, make coffee, make copies, whatever it is that they want you to do for their internship in business. And there's tons of them available, but psychology is a lot harder because a psychology internship is not so straightforward. It's not like you go into a therapist's office and you intern with them, or you go over here and you intern with them. You usually have to do some sort of volunteer work to be able to even get into a position to do an internship. And this actually ties into something that somebody else asked about kind of getting into the door by having experience in fields of psychology. So something that you guys need to realize is that there are actually quite a few jobs that relate to a bachelor's degree. But here's the catch. So you can go with your bachelor's degree, for example, and work as a caseworker with maybe something government related where you're working with children, or you're working with, you know, substance abuse victims that are trying to rehabilitate themselves or something like that. So you go and you do non-therapeutic types of counseling with them to get them into a better life or help them get a job or just in some way rehabilitate themselves. But even though those positions only require a bachelor's degree, all of them are going to require some amount of experience in the field. So that's the catch. That is where psychology or your degree in psychology does not prepare you for a job in psychology, because you can get out with that bachelor's degree and you can go find the dozens of jobs that say bachelor's degree of psychology, but all of them are going to say 6 months, 1 year, 2 years experience in field. And it's a catch-22 because you're going to go apply to those things to try and get the experience. And they're going to tell you, because you don't have experience, we're not going to let you get experience, right? It's the never-ending cycle of the bachelor's degree in psychology where we want you to have experience, but we're not going to give it to you without experience. So what are you supposed to do? This is what you can do. Number one, volunteer somewhere. All hospitals have some sort of program where you can volunteer, and say you did want to do something with substance abuse. Maybe you can, volunteer at Jackson in like the ER or like the particular departments in the hospital that deal with patients with substance abuse who come in on a day-to-day basis. Or you can go to maybe like any of those nonprofit organizations that work in those areas, the places where you would look to apply for jobs in those areas, and volunteer with them. Or you can do something like scout out the research labs that we have on campus at FIU, or that they have at or basically anywhere that you can find an opportunity, and you can do research in a lab related to those populations. So if you were to try and go for the children, the Center for Children and Families at FIU, they have kids coming in and they're running experiments and different types of interventions and stuff like that with children of a very wide variety: ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, you name it. And you can work in those labs and you're getting experience with those people. So when they say you need 2 years experience, they're not saying that you need to have had a paying job where you were a counselor for XYZ population for 2 years. You just need something that relates to that field, that shows that we can trust you around these people, that somebody before has put you in this position and you know what it's going to be like to be in a room with somebody that might be having a withdrawal from an addiction. So if you were working with like a substance abuse population, because it's scary. It's scary. It takes a certain amount of experience and expertise to handle situations like that. And you don't learn that from school. You learn that through experience. So you just find those little things where you can get your foot in the door with those populations, even if it's aiding somebody else, even if it's just helping analyze their data, or being one of the people that walks people out to their car in a wheelchair at the hospital and whatnot. Like, it all counts towards that. It makes a huge difference. I'm working on the course for behavior analysis certification, but I don't have my RBT yet. How long will my current coursework be valid for? That's a good question. So behavior analysis is a very big and booming sort of field for psychology, especially because you can do it with a bachelor's degree and just the extra bit of training. But right now, there is actually a freeze with some of the certifications that they're doing because people abused something related to Medicaid in terms of getting it paid for by insurance. So they're undergoing, you know, a big investigation of the fraud and whatnot. And in that process, they've shut down giving new people certifications. So if you're looking at going into behavior analysis and getting that RBT certification and whatnot, you need to stay very current in terms of when that freeze is ending and what you can be doing in the meantime to get that certification. And in terms of your current coursework, if places do have requirements with coursework, it can be like 5 years or 10 years. Sometimes if you have just the bachelor's degree itself already, you're good and your coursework doesn't necessarily expire. But if you have questions specifically about behavior analysis, there's that one website that has all of the answers about the BCABA, the RBT, the certifications, all of those sorts of things. So definitely go and look at that, and they keep it pretty up to date. And it lets you know also what colleges have certifications within that field to actually help you get those RBT things. So behavior analysis is something that I'm still very much learning about. This course is definitely helping me learn about it. So I might not be as eloquent on that subject area, but I do know something. I do know something. And that website definitely has a lot of answers. Can I work as a life coach with a bachelor's degree in psychology? So being a life coach, I would think that most like therapists or psychologists in general kind of think of the term life coach as being relatively taboo because anybody can be a life coach. You don't need a certification to put your story out there and have other people buy into that and give you money to guide them. The thing is that once you start doing particular types of therapy and you start looking at insurance companies paying for therapy and you start looking at medicinal sorts of interventions for that sort of stuff, you have to have something regulating it, which is where you start needing those degrees. But if you want to be a life coach, there's not necessarily anything that polices that outside of the boundaries of what you legally need a certification for. So if you wanted to go be a life coach for somebody like with substance abuse issues, like you want to help people get clean and sober and you're going to be a life coach and you're going to go and do that, there's not really anything policing that right now. So you just have to kind of make sure that you're not stepping on any of those ways of giving people advice that really fall under something that you have to be licensed to do. You have to kind of draw that distinction yourself. I'm not sure what you mean by independent psychology courses, so maybe write to me later and ask about that. I can't decide between IO Psych and human resources for my master's. Any advice? So as somebody who is in the IO department right now, I'm sure this is not a very popular thing for me to say, but at a master's level, if you get a degree in business, it's going to be more valuable than a degree in psychology if they're essentially doing the same things, which is kind of what IO and HR management are very similar. You can go right now and pull up the organizational psychology page from the FIU Psych, and you can see all the courses they list, and you can do the same thing with the human resource management degree. And there's very little where they really differ, but from an IO perspective, you're looking a lot more at the employees and their well-being to a certain degree. And from a human resource management business degree, you're looking more at kind of bottom line sort of issues and kind of like how you're doing better for the overall organization. So that's really where business and IO Psych start to split. Is business is kind of always going to come back down to how do we benefit the overall business, and IO should kind of come back down to how are we going to benefit the overall worker. And even if you are doing something on more of a business side where maybe you're working with training or performance appraisal or something like that, you're looking at the fairest way to do it for both the business and the employee. So look at the two courses and compare, or look at the 2 degrees and compare the courses out and see which ones interest you more. And that should tell you which area you really belong in. In terms of making the most money, I think that you can make as much money with either one of them, depending on kind of how you leverage yourself and what area you choose to go into with the degree. Was there something else in? So maybe this is the same person that asked this in the chat, but I'm going to talk to you about 2 things. One, the difference between, and by all means, I mean, I still have 28 of you, which is exciting. I don't know if you're the same 28 that started with me, but hey, there's 28 of you. But I'm going to go over quickly the difference between the master's and the doctorate, and then the difference between a PhD and a PsyD. Okay. So really quick to answer your question. When they say independent research or independent field experience or the honors research project, what you're doing in those instances is you're finding a professor that you are going to do some sort of research project under. And the different things that they're listing in those courses that are in the chat right now, between 4916, 4941, and whatever the other one is, 4914, it's just what type of research are you doing? So the honors research project is going to be a lot more involved. Independent field experience is if you're working with a professor, particularly in field. Like I did independent field experience when I was an undergrad because I worked with a cognitive psychologist that was working at the Metro Zoo to study primate cognition. So you weren't just doing research in a lab, like you were actually in field somewhere and had to get, background checked and all kinds of stuff to work there. So independent field experience is you actually going into a school or into a hospital or wherever and doing some sort of thing. And then independent research can be something as small as you have an idea, you want to write a research paper, and you take 1 or 2 credits with a professor that specializes in that area. And you essentially, it's a pass or fail. All of these things are pass or fail. So they don't really count towards your GPA. You can't take them, get an A, and then it counts towards really anything. You get the 3 credits. It counts towards the credit requirement, but you don't get anything other than pass or fail. And yes, you can take 1 credit, 2 credits, 3 credits, all the way up to 6 in one individual semester. So if you take a 1 credit research course, that's probably just you writing a short research paper on a particular topic of interest. If you're doing a 6 credit independent course, that's you doing like a whole project. You are expected to turn in the same kind of work. So probably a really big paper and maybe a study and whatever, equivalent to what you would do for 6 credits in an actual classroom. So you're going to be putting a lot of time into that. But it's a very good thing for your resume. It's very good if you want to do research and get into grad school, or if you just have a particular area of psychology that you're really interested in, but there are no courses about it. So maybe you're really interested in forensic psychology, but there's not a particular course in forensic psychology. I don't know if there is or isn't, but you find a legal psychology professor who knows enough about forensics that they'll do an independent study with you, and you can go research what you are interested in, particularly what you're interested in, and nothing but what you're interested in. So it's kind of cool, but it is independent. You don't go to school to do it. It's pretty much on your own time or whatever your mentor really decides that they want of you. So fun, recommend it for sure. Just to be sure, it would be one of those courses and not all of them. I'm not sure what that question means. You can take those courses multiple times. So you know how you go and if you were to take like Psych 1010 or 1011 or whatever the basic course number is for Psych, and if you tried to take it again, the university would kind of go like, halt, you already took this class, and then they would like apply your forgiveness policy to it or whatever. You can go take independent research in psychology, that same class, Psy 4916, every single semester for 1 credit with a different professor if you want. And it'll just add up those credits towards your overall transcript of what you took in that area. So you can keep taking them over and over. They're all different courses. You can take all of them at the same time if you have 3 different professors who want to work with you in 3 different ways like that. But they are all separate, and you don't have to do them all at the same time. They're distinctly for different situations in psych. Okay, so before I get distracted. So I was talking about this with my senior seminar. Hi to any of you who might be in the senior seminar right now. If you are, you've heard this multiple times now. But when you start looking at careers in psychology, the distinct jump between what's available to you in the world of psych is between a bachelor and a master's degree. It's not between a master's and a PhD. So with a bachelor's degree, yes, there's a lot of different things that you can do. But once you get a master's degree, which is usually a 36 credit course, 36 credit course load, which is usually 2 years. Sometimes they have accelerated programs where in 10 months you can get it done, or you can do it online or do it over the weekends or whatever. But it's traditionally a 36 credit program, which is 12 classes. So a 12 class program. You're usually going to take fall, spring, have summer off, fall, spring, and then graduate that spring. That's how master's programs traditionally work with their course load. And you'll take 3 classes a semester. So 9 and 9, and then 9 and 9 the next year. But with that master's degree, you can do so many different things. And another huge misconception for psychology is that if you want to work in therapy or counseling or whatever you want to call it, psychotherapy, mental health counseling, and whatever, that you need to have a PhD in clinical psychology, which is absolutely not true. You can do therapy, you can have your own practice and all of that. You can be licensed with a master's degree in mental health counseling or whatever else it is, excuse me, whatever else it is that the particular university calls it. Some call it counseling, some call it therapy, some call it whatever. They have a lot of different names for the same general idea. So you can go in and you can do that. And then there is something called a licensed mental health counseling certification, an LMHC, which is kind of like 10 months to a year additional to your master's degree, where you get extra certification doing applied things in the field of counseling. So it's not like taking extra courses or anything. It's just kind of getting that field experience under your belt, and then you get certified. And essentially, once you have an LMHC, the difference between that and having a PhD in clinical psychology is not, there really isn't one. You're going to get that practical experience. You're going to get that under your belt. You're going to have clients. Your clients are going to recommend you to people. You're going to get paired with insurance companies that cover your services. People are going to go to you because that's what their insurance will cover and whatnot. So there's no need for you, if your end goal is to be a practicing therapist, to get a PhD. And as a matter of fact, if you were to go and apply for a clinical psychology PhD program, and they have you come in for an interview and they ask you what your ambitions are with that degree, and you tell them, I want to be a practicing therapist, they will not admit you into the program. Clinical psychology PhDs are very much driven towards research, the kinds of research that therapists will then apply in the actual patient, therapist sort of setting. But clinical psychologists are driven around research. So if you don't want to be in a lab and you don't want to be doing that research, and what your goal is that you want to go be that applied therapist, your best bet is to get that master's degree in whatever field that they call it, like mental health counseling is what they call it at FIU. Now, the difference between a PhD and a PsyD is also when it comes down to the applied nature of the psychology. So PhDs are very, very, very much research driven. There are certain fields where they will prepare you in an applied way, like in IO psychology, they prepare you for applied situations like being a consultant and different types of stuff you can do in an actual business. But for the most part, it's driven by research. And PhDs, more often than not, you will get some sort of funding for the first 4 or 5 years that you're in the program. And that comes from the types of grants that universities receive for doing research. So going and doing this research for your PhD brings money into the university, which then helps them give you money for going there, which it's a nominal amount. It's usually like $18,000 to $20,000 a year that you can make as a PhD student, and you're not allowed to work anywhere else. So you're stuck there living off of that somehow. But you do get some sort of assistance, and the level of mentorship and stuff like that and related to the research it's strong. They invest a lot into you because they are getting something out of you doing the research. When you look at a PsyD, there is a huge component of research to it. They do still do research projects and get involved in research and value research. But PsyDs also prepare you for an applied situation in whatever field you're doing. So there's clinical PsyDs, which if you wanted to go above and beyond that mental health counseling master's and you wanted to have a doctoral level sort of thing because you wanted to be a therapist, you would want to do a PsyD over a PhD because the PsyD is going to give you that more practical interaction sort of stuff with patients. There's PsyDs in IO Psych and stuff like that, but there are fewer PsyDs out there than there are PhDs. Part of that is because the nature of the applied PsyD lends itself better to certain areas of psychology. And part of it is just that a PsyD is a really new thing. If you look at a PhD, they've existed, if you go back and look at like ancient Rome and ancient Greece, there were PhDs and philosophers and all this stuff. If you look at a PsyD, it's a pretty new type of degree. So sometimes people don't give it as much credibility as it's deserved just because it hasn't been around for very long. But it's gained momentum and it's definitely something that's more popular. But because it's not as much related to research, it doesn't bring as much money into a university. And it's not something that you are going to get financial assistance to do. So PsyDs are notoriously more expensive, way more expensive than PhDs. And they're more often than not given by private institutions that cost more money anyway. So if you're getting a PsyD, it's easier to get into PsyD programs because you're paying the money. They don't have to rely on a grant and can only have 2 or 3 people in their incoming class. You're paying for that entire degree so they can have larger class sizes and accept more people. But you're looking at private universities that might not have as good, like as high-ranked psychology programs as PhD programs and whatnot. But the PsyD is definitely valuable. And there are people and patients that would prefer somebody with a PsyD to a PhD just because of the extra application that they get. But in grad school in general, the only time that you can hope to have some sort of financial assistance is in the beginning part of your PhD. You will not get financial aid in terms of grants or anything like that with a master's. You will not get financial aid, grants, and stuff like that with even a PhD or a PsyD. You're looking at taking out student loans and spending that money out of your own pocket to do these degrees, with the exception of the assistantships that are available to PhD students. Every once in a while, there is a department on campus that has an assistantship that they're just given that money, and they will take any grad student that they can get. Some of them, like the Center for Leadership and Service on campus, often has assistantships where even at a master's level, you can get that assistantship with them. But you have to seek those things out, and they're very few and far between. So grad school is an expensive thing. And I guess while I'm on this little topic of grad school, and I still have 29 of you, wow, I've gained one somehow. Yes, right? When you go to Miami-Dade and you get that associate's degree, and then you go to FIU and your associate's just kind of counts towards 2 years of your bachelor's degree, and then you do the other 2 years of your bachelor's degree and you graduate with it, That is not how master's degrees and PhDs work. They are two completely separate paths. So it's not like to get a PhD, you need to have a master's degree. So you go do that master's degree, then you start your PhD basically where the master's left off, and then you finish the PhD and ta-da. They're two separate paths. If you know that you want to do a doctoral degree, you do that straight from your bachelor's degree. You apply to those PhD programs as soon as you reach the end of your bachelor's career. You do not go do a master's first and then apply for the PhD program, because this is what happens. So, and this happened to a classmate of mine in the IO program. We'll use IO as an example. You can go get a master's in IO psychology, and then you can decide, I want to do a PhD in IO psychology. So you apply to the IO programs and you get in. None of those credits count towards your PhD. You will take those same classes, even if you've already done them, even if you just did them and you just graduated and you already went through all of these courses in statistics, you will take those courses again from the beginning. You will take those 36 credits all over again when you do the PhD, because they do not count. Graduate credits very, 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 very rarely ever count towards anything else graduate related. So you also can't do something like start a master's program at FIU, and then halfway through you get into the master's program at and then carry that first year over to the master's program at It's not going to work like that. You're going to have to do it all over again. So given how expensive grad school is, you want to be really, really certain when you choose which path you're going down, the master's or the doctoral path, that you know what you want to do. There are some instances where you do want to do a master's degree and then do a PhD later. Like I did a master's degree in business before I applied to my PhD program in IO psychology, because there was a gap in my knowledge and I knew that I needed something like a master's degree in business to set me apart from the other people who were applying for that PhD program. So I used it as leverage for myself as a candidate, but I never expected any of it to count towards the PhD. So if you're going to do a master's, always, and you know that you might want to do a PhD in the future, do them in separate areas, separate but related, so that at least you get some sort of value out of going through it twice and you're not repeating the same exact courses. So if you did want to do IO Psych, and maybe you were looking at the master's program and trying to decide between the organizational psych one or the business, do the business one. That way, when you go later and maybe do the IO PhD, you have two different skill sets now, where you have human resource classes and the IO program. If you wanted to do a PhD later in counseling psychology, and right now maybe you wanted to do something else, you could go into the education department, and there's different master's degrees in education stuff that relates into psychology that you can do, where you're not going to overlap those things. You have two distinct skill sets that make you more valuable as a potential employee. Do I have any advice on how to get into research? So the actual website, let me find it here, FIU Research Psychology. So it's actually probably just easier if you Google it yourself. Google FIU Psychology Research, and it will come up with psychology.fiu.edu /research/labs/index.html. And it says labs and facilities. And you'll see neurocognition lab, brain and development, child anxiety and phobia, blah, 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 blah. They're all there, right? It gives you a list of every single lab that's on campus that's like an actual big lab. So sometimes people do research on campus and they're not in a lab, or they're not affiliated with a lab, but these are all the ones that are these big kind of freestanding things that get money from the university or from the government and actually have pretty big base of students and faculty that work in it. So you can click on any one of these things and it will give you an overview of the program. It'll tell you sometimes who's in the program, what they're working on, projects, programs, the kind of training they offer you to be in the lab, where they get their funding from, what kind of publications they've done, and whatnot. And then usually there's going to be something at the bottom of that page that gives you all the info about the lab that says who's running it, who's coordinating it, and who you need to talk to if you want to join it. So the Center for Children and Families has a lot of labs that are affiliated with it, and they're constantly sending out messages to us as faculty asking for applicants from the student base. So a lot of these labs have positions where you can go and get them, and they have quite a few positions available. But what you should know is that most of these labs want a commitment from you. So they're going to train you, and they're going to put a lot of time into bringing you into this lab and getting you acquainted. So they usually want 2 semesters of a commitment from that. So they'll want you to work in a fall and spring back to back, or a spring and summer back to back, or a summer and fall back to back. And if they can keep you for longer than that and you fit in well with the lab, they'll usually want to retain you for as long as possible because they don't want to train somebody else. They've got you in there. You know what you're doing. So you can expect to be asked for that kind of level of commitment if you're going to go into a lab like that. But the thing is that you say you're in your last semester and you feel like you're stuck. All right, you want to go to grad school next spring. You can do research at FIU in these labs after you graduate. It's not like something where you have to be a currently enrolled student to be able to do it. You can still get into these opportunities and do these things, say, like the semester or 2 after you graduate, in between grad school and the end of your bachelor's degree. There's still ways for you to get that experience if maybe you didn't fit it in before you graduated. So it's like not all hope is lost there. But somebody said, can I do some classes outside of my Psy bachelor if I already met all of my requirements in the psychology bachelor? I don't see why not. You have to talk to your advisors about that. Can students mentor with you? Are you asking me that directly? Meaning, do I have students that work with me in particular? You have to let me know, Joanna, if that's what you meant. And I will answer that. How can you apply for these research? So they're all listed under, if you go to that, that thing that I talked about where it shows you where all the research labs are, they have links in the individual labs where they either have an application link or they have the professor or the person that runs the lab who you just shoot an email to and you say, hey, I'm interested in working with you. So even so maybe you have a professor that you really liked and you took a class that you really liked with them, and maybe they're not in a lab, but they do independent research, or they have areas that they just, have always wanted to do research in, but they didn't have students to help them or whatever. You can email basically any person that is a faculty in this department that teaches any class and talk to them about whether or not they do research and whether or not there are any opportunities. That is the best way to get involved in labs, is to just start reaching out to the different people that you connect with and seeing where there are opportunities. Like, I am not affiliated with any lab. I'm trying to kind of build a group of students to help me with my dissertation, and we're going to try to pretend to be a lab, but we're never going to be on this psychology lab website. And yes, I will mentor them and work with them, and am happy if you're interested in IO psychology at all and you are trying to find a place to get involved in research, you can certainly reach out to me. But I'm definitely not affiliated with any of the labs, unfortunately, much to the chagrin of my bosses. Since we're here at this hour mark, I tend to try to not have these things go too long, because then I think people start losing interest, or people get intimidated by them and don't want to watch them if they weren't able to go to the live video. So I try not to have them go too long, especially because I do lots of videos throughout the semester on these different topics. So it's your last kind of chance. If you have any pertinent questions you want to ask while I'm actually here, you can quickly type them into the little box in the chat. But maybe I'll find one more of these questions that you guys asked. Let's see. Oh, you are so welcome. Let me see. Somebody asked, and this is something that I talk a little bit about in a variety of subject areas here, but the amount of business knowledge that you need to open a private practice. And I think this is something that very few people realize that they're actually going to need. So whether you want to be a therapist or any kind of psychologist that owns their own business, but especially if you want to be a therapist, you have to take into consideration that you are going to be paying, if you especially want to go into business for yourself and you want to be on your own, you're going to be paying rent for whatever building you're going to be in. You're going to be paying to keep up your licenses. You have to take into consideration that you're probably going to need some sort of like receptionist or person that handles the communication between the office and insurance companies and the office and clients and just the office and everything else. So you're going to need that. You're going to need to have an accountant because at some point you're going to have payroll, or you're just going to be dealing with finances in general in terms of paying for these different types of positions that you're going to need in there. And you're definitely going to need a lawyer, because with any sort of treatment where you require a license to give the treatment, you have to have some sort of liability coverage, which you're going to have to look into, but also have somebody legally representing you in the case that you provide somebody with some sort of guidance and they take that guidance in a certain way that maybe they end up harming themselves or harming somebody else. There's a lot of liability that goes on in the kind of situations that come with patient therapist confidentiality. So there's a lot of different things that you have to take into consideration if you want to go into practice for yourself. A lot. You're much better off kind of easing into practicing by joining, kind of the equivalent of a firm for psychology, or working with a partner and stuff like that in the beginning, because it's very, very hard to open up a business for yourself as an actual practicing psychologist. You are so welcome for the information. I'm always here. You can always email me on Canvas. I know I am like a little behind. I have like 10 emails waiting for my response. I promise you I will get to them by the end of the day today. I'm usually pretty quick to respond. And as we go through the semester and I start to read more of your comments from the discussion board, I'll start posting more dates with different topics in different areas. We're definitely going to go into more detail about grad school. We're definitely going to go into more detail about careers you can get with your bachelor's, master's, PhD in psychology. We're going to talk about research more. We're going to talk about, campus involvement and labs and all of these things. This is just very much kind of an intro sort of thing, just to get us used to one another and get you used to the way that I talk on the webinar stuff, and kind of like, I don't know, it's our little intro party here. But we'll definitely have multiple of these throughout the semester. And if you have like really pertinent questions, or you have some of these areas that you really want to learn more about now and you don't want to wait until we get there, there's all the videos archived from 2 other semesters of this class. And every video is going to be different because everybody's different. Every class is different. You guys are composed of much different people every single time I teach this. So there might be some stuff that we're never going to talk about because nobody ever asks about it, but it's in those other videos, and maybe they'll help. So surf through it, send me emails, and just hang out. This is a semester where you're supposed to learn what you're doing, and I will do my very, very best to make sure that when you get out of here, you feel at least a little bit more confident about the future than you did when you started this. If not, I did not do my job correctly. So thank you guys for coming and watching, and we will see each other soon.